So this is our talk about how to design, not so much how to design, but how to think more about users when you're writing software.
Right. Well, actually, let's introduce ourselves first.
Okay.
What's your name?
My name is Brian Fitzpatrick. Most people call me Fitz.
My name is Ben Collins Sussman. I'm just Ben. And we are going to talk about, it's a very subjective talk. It's based on our experience. We come from the open source world. We both worked on Subversion for many years, and now we're at Google, and we work on the open source team, and we actually work on Google Code's project hosting service. That's what I do. You do some great management stuff. But what we do essentially is everything we're talking about is coming from our experience with working with communities of users. Open source software, closed source software. What kind of relationship do you have with those users?
This is completely based on a series of anecdotes that we're going to tell, in addition to some little bits of information. But most importantly, this is a subjective talk. These are our opinions. If you disagree with them, and that's fine, we can get your own talk and have your own opinion somewhere else. But seriously, we're sort of going to tell this through a series of anecdotes and things that we've experienced, and that's it. We'll get started.
And there will be time for Q&A when we're done. So, first thing we want to talk about is we're all programmers here, right? Or most of us are. So when you think about, well, what does it mean to have successful software, right? There's a lot of different metrics. You can say, well, it's really fast, or has a lot of users, makes a lot of money, right? Or something, or maybe it's really clever. But there are a lot of things to think about besides the technical side, right?
Right.
It's not just about how great your code is. It's actually about, there's a whole social aspect to it that a lot of programmers forget because we're so busy writing code all the time. And that's what we want to talk about.
Right. When you're thinking about software, engineers typically think about the code and some twist of algorithm or writing software or a particular neat bit of Java that they might write.
That's the meat.
It's sort of the meat, right? So people tend to think about the meat of your application. However, what you don't really think about is sort of like making that look more presentable and more appetizing to our users, right? Typically, in the past, engineers have seen what happens when people put sizzle onto a product, right? What you get is you get a whole bunch of sizzle and you get a whole lot of no steak, right? And so people tend to be a little wary engineers tend to be a little wary of doing that.
Well, it's also usually it's a relationship with the marketing department, right? What are you doing to our product? What are you promising about it? What are you saying about it, right? And I guess we're here to talk about how that is not necessarily a bad thing, and trying to sort of create a better understanding of what does it mean to add sizzle to your product. How do you make it presentable to the public without feeling like you're compromising your ideals and like it's still good software?
Right? Exactly.
Absolutely.
So a lot of this stuff is not going to come as a complete surprise to you. This is sort of an opportunity to bring it together, as well as to remind you of some of these things that you might not think of day to day when you're sort of down in the trenches writing up an application.
Pull it from their subconscious.
Exactly. So we're gonna focus on three particular areas in this talk.
So the first part, we're going to talk about marketing. What does it mean? How does it relate to you as a programmer? And when you think about marketing, right, well, you just say the word marketing, right? What's the first thought that comes to your head, right? You probably think about this guy, right? Run away, right? With nothing to do with it, right?
Right. This guy is all sizzle and no steak, right? This is what you tend to think about, okay? The real thing is that people are used to, when they think about marketing or stuff, engineers are used to being lied to, okay? Engineers don't like being lied to, okay? Anybody know when Duke Nukem 3D was announced? 1997, okay?
Right.
That's 11 years ago, and it took them 11 years to go out of business.
12.
And 12? 12 years. 12 years ago, they never released a piece of software, okay? And that's the type of distrust that I think we as engineers tend to harbor when we hear about this type of stuff.
I think we're just inoculated as a culture to any kind of advertising or marketing, right? We take everything, we're skeptical about everything we hear because we just believe that marketing and advertising people are always lying all the time, right? Programmers really don't want anything to do with it. Programmers are very logical people, right? They're obsessed with finding the true thing, and only talking about logical true stuff. I mean, it's we live with compilers, right? Those are the people the tools we use every single day, right? We like order, we like predictability, we like control. We don't like listening to people try to spin things, and then we're sort of left guessing as to what's real and what's not.
Right. 5 years ago, I was the vice president of public relations for the Apache Software Foundation, which is an organization made up almost exclusively of engineers. And most people thought, oh, we shouldn't have to do PR. If we write the best software, people are just going to come use it. And meanwhile, other web servers and other pieces of software that competed with Apache were eating their lunch, because when an analyst would come up to a commercial company and say,
"Where's your white paper?
Where's your white paper? And we want you to answer this, and this about your software." And the company would, have 4 or 5 PR flags, get down their knees, and then worship the analyst and tell them how wonderful they are. And they do all their work for them and hand it to them. And an analyst shows up at Apache for one project in particular, which will remain nameless, and says, hey, we want to know this, and this about your projects, and blah, blah, blah. We want to write a paper, et cetera, and go do all this work. And their basic response was, go screw yourself. Join the mailing list and find it yourself.
Oh, yeah. Go read.
Go read
our docs.
Right.
Not our problem.
So the best approach probably lies somewhere in between those two approaches, the sort of sycophantic begging and then the, go read the mailing list.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing that programmers like to do is, especially when it comes to legal things, right, they start trying to interpret the law, right? I mean, there's a lot of issues that have to do with marketing and PR, and they always get entangled with legal discussions, right, licensing and what are we allowed to say or not say. And programmers love to look at laws and licenses and try to process them like code, when in fact, if you are a lawyer or you know lawyers, they will laugh at you if you talk about that, right? Because the legal system is not perfectly rational. It's not logical. What? I know. It's crazy.
Yeah, if you're ever talking about something legal, like a license, you say, well, it should do something. Stop yourself right there, because you're clearly going down the wrong path.
Absolutely.
But beyond this sort of obsession with truth is that we expect some sort of a meritocracy, I guess you'd say. That the people who put the most effort into something, or the best technical thing, would win.
Right, but if that were true, right, we'd all be using Betamax. Well, nobody uses VHS either anymore. But, right, the classic
But it
story,
had a good run.
Betamax was technically superior, right, to VHS, and yet VHS won, right? So not everything, the technically superior product does not always win, right? That is not the only metric you need to think about when you're saying, well, how's my product going to be successful? You need some sizzle.
Right.
To some degree, you need it, right?
So,
whether you like it or not.
So the point that I try to make is that truth is actually fungible. Okay, there are different shades of truth, and this is a meme that I've been trying to propagate for years, which is that perception, not possession, but perception is 9/10 of the law. What it comes down to is that
First perception.
Exactly. Is that what people see is the reality, whether or not it's true. What people believe, and marketers have used that to their advantage for years and years and years. There's no reason that we as engineers shouldn't do that as well.
Typically, in the first 5 minutes of using a piece of software, you've formed an opinion about it, right? It doesn't matter whether whether you read the docs or you should have read the docs, right? Or you get an opinion about it very quickly. There's either a good or a bad barrier to entry, and then you've made up your life. And that's the truth you now live with. You have a certain feeling about the software, whether you were fair in judging it or not.
Well, with Subversion, we were particularly conservative in calling Subversion 1.0, because when it comes to a version control system, if it loses your data, you're probably never going to come back. Okay? Data, I mean, that's sort of an important thing. It's not really the technically best version control system out there, but it was generally perceived by people as being a good thing. Yep. So, moving along.
Yeah.
One other thing where you can sort of have the sizzle and the steak is that under promise and over deliver. You still have great things to give to people. You still have a great piece of software, but you don't have to tell them everything that you want to give, maybe. So you tell them the first few things. I come from New Orleans, and in New Orleans we talk about lagniappe, okay, a little bit of something extra. Like you buy a dozen donuts, you get an extra donut free. You buy 5 pounds of meat, you get a pound of liver free. I don't know why that was ever a good thing, but apparently that's the way it worked back in the day.
But you certainly don't market that, right? You don't write that in the coupons, right? Or it's just one of those things you do. In the same way, we're talking about under-promising and over-delivering. Google, as a policy, doesn't pre-announce products, right? We don't send out endless press releases saying, we're working on this cool thing, it'll be done this quarter, and because then essentially, right, we set ourselves up for failure, right? It's a matter of surprising people and saying, isn't that wonderful?
Well, you set your expectations really high, and then you wind up with something that people aren't looking forward to. So that's sort of the marketing angle, and we want to talk a little bit about customer service. Now, sort of close your eyes for a second and think, what do you think about when you hear customer service? Okay, in this day and age, especially in the United States, people think of customer service. They think of a sort of a service-oriented industry where someone is doing something for someone else. It's sort of a one-on-one kind of thing.
But it's also sort of considered the bottom of the ladder, right? Like working the help desk in a company. Oh my, customer service, tech support.
Right.
Got to get out of there. What what a waste of time, right?
So we have a graph here that we spent minutes researching. It's basically, you start off, and if you have a successful piece of software, you're going to get more users over time. That's what everybody wants, I think. I don't think there's anyone in this room who writes software that doesn't want more people to use it, right? The problem is that as you add new users, you don't stop writing code. You continue adding to the complexity of your application.
More and more features, right? More and more, well, feature creep at least, right?
Right.
Maybe the users are asking, maybe the power users are asking for more features, so you're like, great, more code, throw it in, look how great this is.
The problem is that as time goes on and your user base widens, you attract less tech-savvy users, okay? And the combination of these three different factors results in an exponential increase in despair.
Very carefully measured.
Very carefully measured, exactly. But the point is that this is something that's really important to realize, is that this complexity is very difficult for users to sort of grok and understand. But you have to listen to them. This is part of customer service. You shouldn't just assume that they're dumb. We had a talk yesterday at the Ignite that was just fantastic, where they were talking about, give your users the real thing. Give them some dumbed-down toy version of that thing.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great point.
Right. I mean, they're not dumb people necessarily. I mean, right, there are, sure, a few of them out there are dumb, but there's not a safe assumption to assume that just because somebody's asking a question or needs help or doesn't understand something about yourself, that they're inherently, that they're dumb in general or they're just not techie people, right? I mean, if something is wrong, you actually need to hear what's going on, and the first step, right, is not be condescending. It's to respect and listen carefully and really try to get some empathy going with what they're experiencing, right? I mean, we're so used to being holed up with our compilers and our code that we sort of lose all perspective of what the rest of the world sees, right?
Right, and people just want to be heard. So give them an opportunity to be heard. Even if they're not writing code for you, they can give you valuable feedback.
You can let them file bugs in your issue tracker and respond with them, right? So then they at least feel like you are listening to them in some degree, right?
An example of this is Google Moderator. I mean, the White House recently used that to sort of get questions from people. Is setting up a moderator instance for, what do you guys want? Let's get some feedback and let's get some people to vote it up. In the issue tracker, users can star things and you can sort of see themes. And we noticed this very clearly in Google Code itself. We have an issue tracker for the product. And we heard very clearly different pain points that people had and different features that they really expected the product to have.
The trends become really obvious if you start deliberately listening and creating some kind of open forum to get feedback. It becomes very obvious what's important, what's not, rather than just what you happen to think is important or what your PM thinks is important. It's really important to listen and get that data from the outside, not just from the inside.
But there's also a fear there. People tend to be afraid of doing that, first of all, because they get a lot of crazy ideas, okay? And they feel like, oh, God, if people start saying this, I'm going to have to wind up writing this, which is not true. Okay?
You don't have to listen to every quack.
You don't have to listen to every single idea that comes in the long tail, right? Just pay attention to the general ideas that you're hearing over and over again, or the questions, or the themes, or the bugs, that sort of thing. Try to do fewer things better, and we sort of use a metric of target in the 80%. As opposed to the 100%.
Right. I think it's really great if your product can do 80%, can solve 80% of everybody's pain really, really well, you're great, right? You see a lot of failure happens when people try to be absolutely everything to everyone, right? Every bell and whistle in the world. Well, I mean, I guess one example is Emacs, right?
Exactly. It's everything to no one.
Right.
Well, here, quick survey. Who in the room uses Emacs? Raise your hand. Who uses VI? Okay, wow. Fight. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, though, I mean, I've been an Emacs user for 12 years, and it makes me crazy, because it's just like the Swiss Army.
Occasionally, though, you will see products out there that try to be everything to everyone. There's some wacky, we're not sure what this is. I think it's...
No, we actually do know what this is, so don't email us afterwards. We have people email us explaining us exactly what it is. But,
Well, there's more than one version of it, so it must be important.
It has a lantern on the back, too. A big, tube lamp.
But it's got a competitor, right?
Right, and there's more of these things, okay?
Don't be this.
So this is an example of something that's just utterly terribly designed, because I think it's trying to be too many things. I understand it's an emergency gadget. Remember that.
Okay.
But
what's a good example?
Here's a great example, okay? You can't boil an egg in this. You can't cook a whole turkey in it. It's a toaster oven. You can make toast. You can toast a bagel. You can do some small pieces of fish, maybe.
Make pizza.
It does them really well, okay? And after we gave this talk last year, someone sent me a picture of a toaster with a radio on the side of it. I'm like, you don't get the point. That's not the point, right?
Yeah. So this does a lot of things, most things for most people, right? Incredibly useful to a wide variety of people. It doesn't do absolutely everything, but boy,
Right.
it hits that sweet spot. So the next thing you need to think about, I guess, is trust. And what we mean by that is it is nice effect. It's an irreplaceable resource. Trust is one of these things that it's a reputation that you build up with your users, and it's one of those things, I guess we think of it as like a bank account, right? Every time you do something well, or you listen to people, or you help solve their problem in some way, you get a little bit of money you put in that bank account of trust, right? But it's very, very easy to destroy that bank account, right? You do one evil thing or one thing that's slap in the face of the users, and all the trust is gone.
Well, that's
right?
people typically do that for short-term gains, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your temptation to betray users' trust, I think, is for a short-term gain, which results in a long-term loss. If you get users to trust you and they like your product, they'll stay with you through thick and thin for a very long time. And the best example of this is, how many people in this room own a car? How many people in this room have a mechanic that they trust? Okay, see me after this talk, please. No, but seriously, this is a great example of. I think mechanics, for the most part, aren't interested in long-term customers. I think it's harder to do that.
It's an assembly line, right? The typical situation is, oh, my car needs maintenance. I go take it to some random dealer who I have no real personal relationship with, and they put it through an assembly line. Then they always try to upsell you to do something that you don't really need, right? And we kind of expect it at this point, right?
And my grandfather managed a Firestone store for 35 years. And after the first 20 years, 95% of his customers were return customers. And that's because he never tried to sell them something. They come in for a flat tire. He'd never try and sell them a radiator flush. Oh, it looks like you need your fob dangle zip-zopped or something like that.
Absolutely.
I don't think people, whether you know a lot about a car or not, I think it leaves you with this sort of sick feeling in your throat, like I'm being played, to some extent. But we've got an example of that with Subversion as well, right?
We worked on the Subversion project for many years, and one of the things we set out at the beginning, we said is Subversion's basically going to be a set of APIs with a small binary that uses them, right? Because we wanted people to connect to them and write alternate clients and things. But our APIs are very, very structured. They occur at many levels, and they're full of all sorts of promises that, we will not change this, we will not change this. When new versions of the product come out, we very explicitly mark old APIs as deprecated, but we do not get rid of them. We make sure they work. We keep them testing. And that's just about, that's a certain kind of relationship with programmers, right? They're another kind of users. And
but we reap the benefit. We still reap the benefits to that today, because Tortoise SVN which is an amazing piece of software. Those guys wrote a really complex piece of software that has made Subversion much more popular in general.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the thing you need to think about when you're listening to a user, right? Someone's giving you a piece of feedback, is you often have to read between the lines. What we mean by that is, do what I want, not what I say. So, I had this problem, like, for example, trying to teach your parents who may not be tech savvy how to use a computer, right? Maybe you're on the phone with them or something. They're saying one thing, and usually you have to sort of listen. It becomes a skill, like, well, I think what they really mean is X, or they're describing something in a way that's not familiar to you, right?
Right.
It doesn't mean they're dumb. Just means they don't know the same lingo as you, right? Or maybe they don't know how computers work to the same
People have a
degree,
different
right?
mental model, right? People have a very different mental model of computers, how computers work, especially if they're not an engineer. So, and I'm going to digress for a moment and tell a story about a pencil sharpener to give you an idea of how different people's mental models are. A couple years ago, my grandmother said, is your grandfather's computer still any good? And now it's a 1990 Macintosh SE. It hasn't been used in 6 or 7 years. I said, I really don't think so. It's black and white. It doesn't have an internet connection. It's probably best to just, give it away or recycle it or something. She said, oh, okay, because I only ever turn it on anymore when I need to sharpen a pencil. And I stopped, and I scratched my head, and I played that back again in my head, and I realized I really have to know. Probably don't want to know, but I have to know what she's talking about. So I started asking some questions. Well, that's interesting, Grandma. And it turns out that she has an electric pencil sharpener that's plugged into a power strip into which this Macintosh has been plugged into. So once a week, she'd take her pencils, she would go into the office, she would turn on the power strip, the little Mac would go beep, and it would start firing up its hard drive and reading its operating system. She'd sharpen her pencils, and then she'd kill it.
Cut the power.
mercilessly, not even before it even booted up.
Poor
to
Mac.
let you know, I rescued this poor Mac from its fate, and it's been put out to pasture with all the other Macs and Commodore 64s and whatnot.
That is a good story about mental models.
Right, but this made perfect sense to her, right? But beyond that, seriously, beyond just listening to your users and focusing on giving them good service, take the opportunity to delight them. You know, being
isn't
whimsical
art,
isn't actually bad. I think it is an art, and it's somewhat of a cultural thing across some pieces of software. Some pieces of software, I think, do this really well.
Well, they'll put Easter eggs in, or they'll do silly things, or just something so that they're not taking themselves quite so seriously, right? They understand that there's some empathy going on between the software, the company, and the user. It's not just this formal relationship, right?
Right.
So, I mean, Google's an example of that. We do a lot of silly things, right? We've got doodles that happen year-round, and we get unbelievable amounts of email about particular doodles, why we did do a certain doodle or didn't do a certain doodle.
Right,
But
no matter
people
no matter what they
crazy,
do,
right?
they get a big pile of, we love this, and a big pile of, we hate this.
I'll talk to my relatives and like, oh, did you see the doodle that Google did last week? I'm like, oh, I guess so.
But we're talking about inspiring passion in users. Right? I personally don't care if you guys love this talk or hate everything we say and disagree with it all, as long as we spark some reaction in folks and make you think a little bit about something. You know, if you're asleep, then that's probably means we failed somewhere.
Google has a long history of doing April Fool's jokes as well, right? Which every year it's something different. It was just in 2008, every single link on the YouTube front page went to a Rickroll. Okay, great. It's funny, right? One day.
But why would you do that? That's most people don't even like. It seems so impractical and so whimsical. But people remember that and they're like, oh God, I remember I was there. You know.
I think another great case is you can use humor to sort of encourage people to do the right thing. There was a social networking site that went up for a little while where they really wanted people to upload photos, and a lot of people won't do that at first when they join a social networking site. So this site, what they decided to do is put it in a default image of Dick Cheney to every new user. And oh my goodness, everybody uploaded a new photo right away.
Over 90% of their users uploaded a new photo. You know, clearly something humorous there, right?
But that's just another way of delighting the users in some way or not. So the third thing we want to talk about is focusing on users, right? We talked about marketing and customer service. What does it mean to actually focus on them and have them affect your everyday activities?
What do you think about when you hear focusing on users? You usually think about the orbiting brain lasers, right?
Nope, not released.
Oh, we don't talk about pre-release software, sorry. But
usability.
It sort of calls into usability. It falls into making your software something that people can comprehend and do great things with. You know, if users can't try out your software, you don't have any users, right? And like we said earlier, the first impressions are really key to this sort of thing.
And the barrier to entry.
Yeah, the metaphor we like to use is one of a storefront, okay? If you're walking down the street, you look in the store window and you see something, oh, hey, there's a doodad I want to buy. You walk inside and you inspect it, okay? That costs you nothing but a few steps. If you walk up to the door and they say, stop, we'd like you to fill out this form that goes all this information about yourself. You know, you're going to be like, really? I just want to. It's not that important to me, and they're going to go away before they even have a chance.
Read this documentation, right? Read this license. Read it. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's crazy. Back to the Emacs and VI, which we mentioned before. When I first was introduced to Unix, years and years ago, I remember saying, well, which editor should I learn, Emacs or VI? And everyone in the room kind of laughed at me and said, well, you figure it out which one you want. We're not going to tell you. So I started up VI, and I really didn't know what to do, and I was typing things, and nothing was happening, and I kind of got frustrated. And then I started up Emacs, and I just started typing, and there were characters appearing. Oh, it's just like a word processor. Now,
how did you figure out how to quit it?
Well, that was...
I had to unplug the computer to quit Emacs the first time
quit,
I tried it. I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
I couldn't quit VI either, but the point is, at least, in the first 10 seconds, I just had an initial impression of like, oh, look, here's something that's familiar to me. At least it's behaving somewhat like what I expect, right? Now, maybe that's not the perfect example, but I mean, I think it's a nice anecdote about first impression.
Well, there's a lot of examples. I mean, Perl and PHP, they're not generally considered really powerful things for writing web apps or general apps, but they're really easy. There's a really low barrier to entry with these things. Or Fink, for example. If anybody uses Mac OS 10, there's this thing called Fink that has all these extra packages and stuff. In Tiger, they had this really nice disk image. You just double-click it, you install it, and it's done. As soon as Leopard came out, they didn't have this ready, and so you had to download things and build things and go through all these crazy
Everybody
steps.
stopped using it.
Well, people eventually
people
started, but it was a higher barrier. You're more likely to say, oh, heck with it, I can live without this stuff, okay?
So one way we like to think about usability is we have this bell curve, right? On one end, we have Donald Knuth. On the other hand, we have Fitz's grandmother.
Who I
We
love
talk-
dearly, really.
We do love her, right? I've never met her. So the question is, where does your software fall in terms of usability? We just want to think about drawing a line, right? Every user to the right of the line is able to use your software with not much effort, right? So we can sort of talk about various pieces of
So
software.
we're sort of
on this
we're
model,
version control geeks. So we think Subversion actually falls pretty easy, in the easy to use. And so there's a lot of people that it's accessible to.
Well,
quite
even people who have
frankly.
never used version control before, right?
Right.
Find it not too hard to get used to, right?
Right. And another example is Git, which is it's technically a great piece of software, but it's quite hard to use.
And you can do anything with it, right? But you have to be this tall or this technically awesome to even get past that first day or two, right? I've heard people talk about the first 2 weeks of using Git as being sort of mind-numbingly hard. But I hear it's actually getting better, that line's moving to the left now.
So we're big fans of Mercurial.
We are.
Which we think is actually sort of finds a nice middle ground for something as powerful as that.
Incidentally, Mercurial is now available on Google Code project hosting. If you haven't seen our blog posts about it, you can now use Mercurial instead of Subversion if you're setting up an open source project. So there's going to be a talk about that at 4:30 today. So side note.
but the other thing to think about, so we're talking about barrier to entry. We have a couple more fun examples here, okay? This is sort of the standard, credit card application, right? I mean, this is a massive pile of stuff. There's plenty of sites you've been to that want you to try out and fill out all this stuff. Anyone in the room ever used TripIt? Okay, TripIt is really cool.
The best user interface ever.
It's
Why?
For signing up because you don't have to do anything.
There is no user interface.
You just start. You can use the user interface,
Well,
but
yeah.
you just start emailing, your trip to it, all the information,
Well,
your rental
right.
car, your flight, etc.
You sign up for a car and hotel and airplane on the regular websites. You get these receipt emails back. Thank you for registering for your flight. Thank you
Right.
for your. And you forward those emails to this email address. That's it.
And then
And
it
then you
sends
go
you back this nice.
Right, yeah, you go back to the TripIt website, and it's parsed all your emails and put them into this beautiful itinerary, and everything's organized. It's just fantastic.
Super easy to use and try out.
Absolutely.
And then people wind up staying around.
One of the things I want to talk about is users versus usage. This is an interesting term. We talk about this a lot at Google, right? We say, I've got 50 million users. I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? Are they actually using it? Like some companies will say, they'll say, well, we had 50 million downloads, so we must have 50 million users. Or wait a second, you don't know anyone's actually using your software. So we talk about this a lot at Google as a metric of success and usabilities. We want to measure who is actually using your software for how long, right? I guess...
the example for that
oh, yeah.
is who knows what AR is, the AR utility in Unix. Okay.
Everyone ever heard of AR?
It's the Unix.
It's in bin.
It's bin AR. It's the Unix archive utility. Okay. It's installed on millions and millions and millions of computers, but no one uses it.
Well, I mean, it's probably on every Linux and every Mac laptop out there,
Yeah.
right? But nobody. It has zero usability, but millions of users.
So who
right?
cares?
Sorry, zero usage.
Right.
Absolutely.
So the next part of focusing on the users is sort of we're talking about laziness. Okay. Now I personally admit I am incredibly lazy. I would much rather write an application than write code. So the least amount of code that I need to debug, maintain, remember what the heck a document, remember what it was about, the better. But when it comes to designing your interface and stuff, you really have to spend more time so that your users can spend less time. Okay. This is lazy. All right.
Your favorite application.
Your favorite application. This is lazy.
Oh yeah.
Okay? And now I understand this came back from the days when people didn't spend time designing any sort of a command line interface, but I can't remember a darn thing about tar other than CFV and XFV, right? I mean, that's about it.
It becomes a reflex, right?
Yeah.
Who knows what the other stuff does?
Yeah. Et cetera. Mail a copy to Martha Stewart, whatever. Not there's that command, but.
Oh, I hate this. This is one of those things. About the.
It's a huge pet peeve of mine.
Where you go to a website, right, and you're like, because it's so hard to parse out spaces and dashes. We wouldn't want to stress our programmers out. Let's make the users do it instead. Great idea.
Right, or even then you get the one where you have to enter your phone number. You type the first 3 letters. It automatically advances you to the next one, and you hit tab and go into the next field.
Yeah.
You make your users feel dumb, and people feel dumb. They hate you, and then they go away. But beyond just the usability stuff,
Speed.
Speed is really important.
It's a huge impact on usability. In fact, it's one of those things that actually it affects usability in this sort of weird, unconscious kind of way, right? You may not realize how fast or slow something is consciously, but it actually affects your mood, and it affects how you feel about a piece of software. Like, if you've used, especially on mobile phone apps as an example, right? Certain applications will be super quick and responsive. Others, you'll click a button and you sort of wonder what's going on. And you may not register in your mind that I'm frustrated with it, but it does actually change your mood, right?
It changes your likelihood just to use something off the cuff, okay? So here's another graph that we spent minutes researching.
Minutes.
As time goes on and you get more users, right, sometimes people notice that the number of users they have plateau, okay? And the marketing guys decide at this point we need more sizzle, right? And so that's the solution, right? It's a way to solve this. But what it also turns out is if you look a little bit more carefully, because your users have grown, your application's slower, you've maybe got some bad algorithms in there.
You're not scaling.
You're not scaling very well, okay? Your latency gets to a point where your existing users use your application less, and your new users either come and go,
and the end result,
or do very little. And of course, this always means that despair increases exponentially.
Very carefully measured.
Carefully measured. So here's an example. I'll give you a little actual data here with some math behind it, which is that if you have 1 million users, which I think would be great, I don't think anybody here wouldn't want 1 million users, each one of them does 20 requests a day to your app. Of course, we're talking about some sort of networked app here. Each response is 500 milliseconds too long. Over the course of an entire year, you've wasted 116 years of people's time.
Holy smokes. Please stop killing your users.
So it's sort of a plea to not kill your users. So beyond latency, I'll talk a little bit about complexity, which we've touched on earlier.
Yeah, no, complexity is not necessarily an evil thing, right? Some problems really are complex. But the thing you should be striving for is to sort of, there is an art to dealing with complex problems and yet taking that complexity and still making it accessible, right? But not just dumping it in the user's face, right?
Right, you don't have to dump it in the user's face, and you don't have to dumb it down so that, anybody can quote-unquote use it. But you make things very weak and not very powerful.
We have a nice counterexample. Has anyone ever used Eudora email program, or maybe 10 years ago?
I used to use Eudora,
okay.
Sure,
yeah.
Okay, we've got a couple of screenshots of the Eudora preference panel, okay? And I'm going to count through them really quickly, okay? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18.
What is it?
What is a mood watch? Why do I need a panel for a mood watch? Okay, but there's more. 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. Yeah. 27 separate panels to configure a mail client.
I know. I mean, email is a complex problem, right? But you don't really need to throw that all in the user's face like that. It's really just, it's absolutely insane. What's a good example of hiding complexity? I think probably everybody has one of these in their pocket. Wow, is this a dated picture now? It probably is.
Yeah.
But I mean, think about how hard it is just designing an MP3 player, right? When before the iPod came out, there were a lot of different models out there, and they all had millions of little buttons and weird little fonts on there. And it was kind of hard to use. And I think what Apple did with the brilliant thing. I mean, it's clearly there's a lot of electronics, right? There's a lot of complexity going on just in terms of hardware. But the thing they did was they took this very difficult problem of managing your music, right? And they took it off of this device and they put it onto a real computer.
With a keyboard, with an actual full-size keyboard.
And they wrote this beautiful piece of software to organize it and manage it, right? And then all that complexity has shifted off to the computer where it's doable, right? And then the device itself becomes incredibly simple. It just becomes a very simple mirror for playing back all the complexity that you've already organized somewhere else.
And this is still a very complex piece of software. Treat your music as data. You can rate things. You can do genres. You can do smart playlists, all that stuff. It's really quite impressive. Another example of something that's incredibly complex is Google Search, okay? If you really want to strip this down, it's basically a text box and a couple of buttons and a logo,
You don't really need the
You don't even need the I'm feeling lucky button, or the logo. In fact, you can just hit return and get rid of the buttons entirely, okay? Now, that is a window into a massive amount of data. And it's not just dumbed down. You can still use some very powerful search operators on there if you want.
If you're a power user, right, you can go learn all the fancy syntax.
Right, but it's an illusion of simplicity, and just typing whatever into that box 90% of the time gets you where you want to go, and this is sort of what it looks like behind the scenes, right?
Piles of computers.
But beyond that, we want to talk about another way of hiding this complexity is abstractions, right? Is abstracting out some of this complexity is a way for you to sort of hide, I guess, some of the complexity while still giving users the opportunity to do things. the real problem with this is that all abstractions are leaking, okay? Especially if you use the web, you notice see this every day. You hit a 404, you're in a web browser. What happened? Where am I? Your plugin isn't found.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about it. Even the most non-technical users, right? They see 404. It's become part of sort of everyday speak, even those people don't know where that comes from or what that means.
Right.
That's an abstraction leaking out to the user, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right?
No.
I mean, it's not. I guess what we're trying to advocate here is that it's not. Don't need to try and prevent all abstractions from leaking. Instead, you should go and say, well, that's fine. Let's actually create a layer that people can build on, right? Like an API layer or some way so people can get under the abstraction and really do what they want to if you're if you're a programmer, right?
Right,
or
and so an example of that, the Apache web server years ago decided that people, in some cases, needed to do more than just configure things to a little text file. So they had a module interface where you could hook into the request-response loop in any one of a bajillion different places. But this gave people like you guys, like the engineers, the ability to really do a lot with it. And Google knows this too.
Google Calendar, right? I mean, everyone uses, well, lots and lots of non-technical users using Google Calendar, love it, giving me all sorts of testimonials, my friends, about how it's changed their life. And yet there's a great API for it too, right? You can mix it and match it, embed it, and all sorts of things.
And we could go on and on about, I mean, this whole conference is about that, right? This whole conference is about the fact that there's all these APIs to all of our different products. I mean, Lars this morning in the keynote, do you guys go to the keynote this morning? Do you guys like Wave? Is that like pretty cool? Yeah? Yeah?
Jury's out.
All right, they're all clapped out from this morning, I think. But they realize that it's being able to hack into things like maps and whatnot and access it through strong APIs are what makes it really great, I think. So we have a couple of stories to end up here.
Well, yeah. I think this is your story, but I mean, actually, I've had other people tell me this as well, is that, all right, Google's a corporation, it's got a lot of people, but a lot of people don't actually realize that. There's a lot of people out there who really, they just think Google's part of their computer, or they think it's part of their web browser. And I've actually met people who will say, oh, I work for Google, and they're like, oh, I didn't know anybody worked there, right?
Exactly,
I just thought it was just...
My mother-in-law introduced
just a
me to
text box.
some 82-year-old friend of hers, and she said, this is my son-in-law, he works for Google. And she looks at her and looks at me like, what am I doing here? She said, I didn't know anybody worked at the Google.
Well, we've had the opposite, right?
Right. Well,
this is my favorite. You tell this.
One of our other friends out here told his aunt that everyone was going to Disneyland a couple years ago.
All the Google employees.
All the Google employees were taking a couple days and they were going to go to Disneyland. And her aunt said, you can't do that. He's like, what do you mean I can't do that? She's like, well, who's going to do my searches for me?
I just want to imagine switchboard operators.
Somebody who's on the yellow pages looking things up. But I mean, again, this is the way people perceive things. And the point of that is just to think about the fact that the way that you perceive your software from the inside looking out is very different than people who aren't as technical, who aren't engineers, perceive your software.
Right. And so it's not just about the code, right? I mean, yes, we all have an inherent distrust of marketing and spin and interacting with users. It's something that sort of scares us as programmers. But you are able to have a healthy relationship, right? With these facts, with these people on your team. You just need to find that nice balance where you are promising the right amount of thing, they are promising the right amount of thing, they're adding the appropriate amount of sizzle to your steak,
right?
And you end up with something that's really usable.
And you're listening to your users as well. So, and that's all we have to say about that. Thanks for coming. We do have a little time for Q&A. If you have any questions, come up to the mic and ask them, please. If you have any answers, definitely come up to the mic and ask and give us them.
Great.
Is that it? Anyone?
Good.
Oh, somebody's running up. Okay.
Somebody.
Hi, are there any standards that Google uses for processes to kind of, review products, how they're being used? Are there 5 steps or something like that they go through?
I'm not sure. If there are any processes to review how products are being used? Oh, you mean how do we evaluate usability?
User experience, like research and stuff like that, and user testing. We do
a lot of that.
Tons of that. Absolute tons of that. I mean, everything. Sometimes if you're doing a Google search, you'll see results come up differently. For example, it looks a little different.
Once in a blue moon.
Once in a blue moon. That means that you just saw a test that we tried out. We try and see if people behave differently and how they behave. So we definitely do a lot of that.
We also, I mean, we'll do experiments on people, right? See how they change behavior. That's an unwilling experiment in that case, right? You might be a subject of experiment without realizing. But we also do deliberate experiments too, where we actually will have user discussion groups, user focus groups, or somebody will volunteer to use a product and we'll watch them use the product and study what they're doing. I mean, it's classic user experience stuff.
Thanks. Next question.
Are people or kids who are growing up with phones and computers from very young ages, how is this going to change the way users see and use software, and sort of how is this going to change over the next 20 or 30 years as everyone starts to know how to use a computer from they're 2 years old or whatever?
Well, I think the bell curve, the competency level is just going to continue shifting, as more people are used to having these sort of technical devices around and that sort of thing.
I guess I don't feel like it's a big paradigm shift, right? I mean, when I was a kid, there were hardly any computers at all, right? But yet, everyone in my generation, my parents' generation, grew up with other forms of technology that they did not understand, right? How many people understand their television sets or the electricity or the heating system in their house, right? I mean, none of us can go be dropped in a field and survive anymore. We've all lost that ability to some degree. We're all dependent on technology to some degree. So to me, computers and cell phones just feel like just yet another piece of magic in our lives, just like everything else that we use to sustain ourselves, right? Just one more thing.
Yeah, but I agree and I disagree a little bit with you. I mean, I agree that people don't understand the internals of something, but I think they're going to be much more capable of dealing with more complex technological things. I think we see that and I think that's more of what your question was, if I understood.
And more
right.
OCD.
Yeah, and a little more OCD, and you're going to see a lot of people talking to each other less and just texting each other more, or something to that effect. Yeah. I don't know. Social implications are interesting. I think it brings people together to some extent, and maybe brings them apart. We don't know. Yes?
Yes, I wonder how both of you think about designing software for the way users currently think versus taking them into a new model of doing things. And one example that jumps to mind was Gmail, how there was no delete button at first, and they're trying to push them towards a new model, a totally new model, and then eventually caving and adding the delete button.
I personally agree with the delete button. Even though I rarely use it, it's nice to know. It's like an emergency exit. I don't want to have to use it, but it's nice to know it's there.
I think there's a tightrope you need to walk, right? I mean, if you have a new radical way of working with software, I don't think it will get a lot of uptake if it's completely alien, right? I think you need to find some balance between somewhat familiar and then users are willing to tolerate a little bit of the unfamiliar if they see an obvious gain in productivity or something, right? And I think Gmail's an example of that. It's like, okay, it's a familiar. I've used email before, right? But a lot of friends of mine who started using Gmail weren't used to seeing conversations grouped together, right? And that was a little bit of a shock. But it was not too much, not so much that they ran away screaming. And now, months later, they're like, oh, I can't ever remember living without it.
Right. But there was huge advantages. I mean, you still have to offer a net gain to your users if you're going to have something new like that. Gmail's first offer was a gigabyte of storage space, which was, two orders of magnitude more than anybody got at the time. Okay, and people really thought it was an April Fool's joke 5 years ago when they announced that, because it was.
Announced
I did.
On April 1st.
I was like, come on, this is crazy. Who can do that?
So I work at GrooveShark.com, right, and we have a very healthy rivalry between everybody in engineering that thinks that we should test 8,000 shades of gray, and our designers that say, hey, this is the right one, right? Everybody in engineering points to the fact that Google tests things a lot. Everybody in design points to the fact that one of the famous Google UI designers or whatever quit, and her famous thing was, it took months to do anything because we had to test 8,000 shades of gray. So question is, from your experiences, where do you draw the line? Where do you really find kind of the best compromise between testing a bajillion shades of gray and then just actually implementing one that will work without so when you're going forward and you're building features, right? There's the continuum of testing every version of every possible thing, or there's just doing it the way you envision it and the way that you think will work. How do you balance that? Do you have any suggestions there?
It's an interesting tension.
Yeah,
right?
I think it is an interesting tension, and I probably have a little different view than a lot of people on that. So anybody here familiar with everyblock.com or chicagocrime.org? Okay, everyblock.com is an amazing site, especially if you live in one of the cities it covers. But Adrian Holovati, who started as a friend of mine, And when I was talking to him, I'm like, why does like the Django website look so beautiful? Why does Chicago Crime look so beautiful? You know, I'm like, you're not a designer. I know you're not a designer. You're a journalist and an engineer. And he said, it's because I have a UX designer who I really trust, and I leave him to make all the decisions for that. The user experience and user design, I think, is actually incredibly sophisticated, but it's a thing that most engineers, myself too, at some point, think that they can just understand. You know, same for PR. I think most engineers like, oh, this is a soft skill. I can figure this out, when you really can't. And you don't have as much of a respect for, I think, other people's abilities in that. So I personally believe that most of the time, if you can find someone who you trust and let them sort of make that decision, if there's not a lot of trust between those two, I would say you might have some issues, especially if you don't respect what they're doing or saying.
I think the tension you're pointing out is between art and science, right? There's an art to it and there's a science to it, right? Some people have good taste, some people have terrible taste, right?
That's subjective. We always have good taste.
Always, right? Everyone else always has bad taste. But I guess my feeling about it is you need to find people with good taste to get you, 80% of the way there. And maybe they'll make the sort of the artful decisions that are more emotional, right? Less rational to sort of decide maybe the overall look and feel or what features are exposed or whatnot. And then that last 20% can sort of go into the realm of scientific testing, like, well, what color should this be? Exactly how wide should this part be, right? And maybe there really are measurable usability metrics that come from that scientific bit, right? So there's a tension, but I think they can cooperate if you do it right. It's not all one or the other.
Right, and I still think that there's the opportunity for testing. And if you, in the engineering side, you can make it easy to do experiments or that sort of thing, especially if you're dealing with networked apps and not something you have to, buy a CD and download it. Those days are thankfully going away, I think. But again, there is a balance there. But I think it really requires some sort of trust and respect of the folks on the other side of the fence.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Just like it requires trust and respect for your users, that they're saying what they want, what a majority of them say they want, is something that's good to add to your product.
UI is a really hard field.
It really is. It really is. And engineers beat the
they
heck
just
out of
assume
UI people.
anyone who may not be a programmer must not be very skilled, right?
Right.
There's sort of this weird bias in the industry.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
what are the different things that engineers think they can do? UI design, PR, legal stuff, all these different things. You just read things ahead, compile, and go ahead, right? And rarely is it the case. Next question.
So as a person that actually does a little bit of everything, engineering, UI design, everything, I can say that actually UI design is pretty having and something that I'm still having a hard time getting a good grasp of it. Well, one of the challenges that we're having is that what's a preferred method of educating your users? So you do have a piece of technology that you can do fantastic stuff with it, but you need to get users to use it the right way. And there needs to be a little bit of education. I know it goes counterintuitive, so you have to make it so simple enough that everyone can just get it right off the bat. But what if there are, like for example, the mail application you guys showed from Eudora, that was an overkill. But what if there is some essential steps that they really have to take? In your experience, what's the best recommendation to do that? Is it videos, images, splicing it up so people go into chunks, in chunks?
I'd probably start with user testing, quite frankly, because I think if you get something and you put someone in front of it who's not a super tech savvy person, isn't familiar with it, and look at what they do first, look at what confuses them, look at where they get lost. I think that's a very telling kind of thing. Beyond that, certainly documentation, fun videos. I mean, remember years ago, the Rails had that video of how easy it was to build an app. And that was a huge win for those guys, because it was a couple minutes long, and you could see just how easy it was to build their sort of demo app.
The things that I've seen actually not work well is when a company puts all of their eggs into people either learn sort of bottom up or top down, right? And some people want the overview, they want the video, they want to read the manual, right? And then some people just want to jump in and play with it and figure it out as they go, right? And there are different techniques for teaching both ways. And one of the things I see when companies don't do a good job is they choose just one technique. Like maybe they'll have an online help system that's just for bottom-up users, right? But there won't be an overview anywhere. Or maybe they'll do a video that has a general overview of how the system works and how cool it is, but then there won't be any bottom-up learning, no help system that's sort of context sensitive or anything like that. So I think you need to think about both kinds of users when learning. That's my pet peeve.
And also, can you guys comment? Are you guys familiar with the process that Google, the iPhone team had to go through in order to make the Google mobile app?
No, I'm not.
No idea.
But
Oh, okay.
we could chat about it
Sorry.
offline if you know, maybe.
Thank you.
Isn't just they go to Steve and he yells at him or something?
Well, should we call?
I think we're done.
Yeah.
We'll be up here for a few minutes and then we'll step outside. But if you have anything else you want to chat with us about, or please stop by. Thanks
Thank you.
again for coming.